Hello, beautiful people. Welcome into another episode of the Fat Guy Podcast. I am the Fat Guy. Most people just call me Brett. Appreciate you listening today. Whether you're into intermittent fasting, keto, maybe you're looking to do both, weight loss, health improvement, all that kind of stuff. I try my best to not only share my personal experiences, but also share research that I find, try to encourage you, and try to help make either the keto or intermittent fasting lifestyle easier. And so I appreciate you coming along for the ride, and we're going to try to do that again today with the easiest keto method ever. Like, I can't tell you how many people I get messages from that say keto is so hard. Like, I don't understand it. What is a macro? What is this counting the? How do I figure out how many grams of protein chicken has, and how many grams of protein do I need? And what's the carbs and the fat? They say I need a lot of how much fat. There's a lot of questions, and it can seem complicated. You actually can make it complicated, but I have learned now, almost 3 years keto, how you make it easy. It's just easy, simple, no-brainer. Anybody can do it. I look forward to sharing that with you today. Just a brief word about the podcast. So we've introduced over time ads into the podcast. It's a service that the streaming company that I stream my podcast through offers. I don't go out and find people to advertise. I don't know who advertises. They just kind of insert the ads, and I've agreed to that to try to offset the cost of hosting. So I can tell you this year, 2019, I've averaged $7 a month in revenue from the ads on the podcast. $7 a month. My hosting, to host this podcast for a year, this isn't counting my time. It isn't accounting the equipment, the time I record it. The research that I do when I share research, it didn't count any of that. Just the cost for me to host this podcast every year is, well, let me tell you what. Hang on just a second. Alexa, what is 225 divided by 12?
225 divided by 12 is 18.75.
$18.75 a month is what it costs me to host this. And I'm making $7 a month off the ads. Now, we started Patreon earlier this year, where if you really appreciate what we do and you want to support us and you want to get bonuses and extras, you can become a Patreon supporter. And there's a lot of extras. I do extra podcasts over there, extra research. You're first in line to ask me questions. I really try to help my Patreon supporters all I can, but I'm adding something new to that. Starting officially with this podcast, not only will my Patreon supporters get my podcast early, at least a day before anybody else, they will also be ad-free. I'm going to upload them directly to the Patreon server, so there will be no ads inserted from the Spreaker company that I use. They'll be 100% ad-free. So if you don't like ads and you want to support us, then feel free to become a Patreon supporter. And you can find out more about that at losewithmason.com, 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 losewithmason.com. I hate to take up the first 3 minutes of this podcast dealing with this business. But it's something I've been thinking about, and I've been trying to come up with an answer. And then it's also in response to a comment I got on one of my recent podcasts I posted, where somebody just lit me up about having ads. In an attempt to try to offset that $18.75 a month I spend on hosting my podcast, I've inserted what's called a mid-roll ad on my last two podcasts, and I waited till the 10-minute mark to do it. Now, my podcasts are usually 20 to 30 minutes long, usually. And so the 10-minute part is at least halfway. I pushed the mid-roll ad as far into the podcast as I could so that it would be less obtrusive. I don't know how long they are. I think they're 30 seconds. But to me, it was like it's a minor intrusion for something I'm offering for free. And it may, adding that one extra ad may help me offset the cost of this podcasting. Like, I don't charge anybody to help them. People you would be floored if you knew how many private messages I get asking me for help with keto, intermittent fasting, random questions about nutrients or calories or this food. It's all day, and I love to do it. It's my calling in life. But it does take up a lot of my day, and I do spend a lot of time helping people, and I love it, and I'm just trying to offset the cost of podcasting. So now that I've wasted 4 minutes of your time, let me encourage you to follow us on social media. Fat Guy Podcast is the username. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can send me messages that way. As a bonus, if you are a Patreon supporter, you support me on Patreon, which is basically buying me. Basically, you're essentially agreeing to buy me what turns out to be like a Whopper this month. It's what it's really nothing, but it means the world to me. But Patreon supporters can send me messages, and they go to the front of the line. So that's another benefit. You're going to get the podcast ad free. So losewithmason.com is where you go to find out about that. And now we're going to jump in, finally, at long last. I promise I'll never do that again. Like in the future, brief mentions about it, but that's it. So, in the future, short. But thank you for my Patreon supporters. And I have to mention them now. So let me pull up my sheet where I can actually give credit to the folks who do support us. Cindy Carr, Bessie Williams, Kenneth Wilkerson, Bobby Houston are all patron supporters. Thank you guys so much. It means the world to me. Now, what can be complicated, keto, what can be complicated, it's not Atkins per se, it's not low carb per se, it's kind of its own thing in that, like Atkins had an induction phase, which I think was for the first 2 weeks or something, you were less than 10 or 15 or 20 carbs or something, and then they moved to a next phase and then the next phase. Keto, you are always shooting for 20 carbs or less, and that's it. And then people get off into the weeds about percentage of protein and percentage of fat. Now, the formula I used to do was do two things. Keep your carbs 20 or less. And I would say for the first 6 to 8 weeks that you're keto, you need to go with total carbs. None of this net carb stuff. Don't be netting out carbs. Just total carbs. Your total carbs need to be 20 or less. And then you need to keep your protein and fat even approximately. So if you have, 75 grams of protein in the day, you need to have about 75 grams of fat. And in the beginning, in the first 6 weeks, you want to err on the side of caution with fat being more. So if you had 75 grams of protein, you'd want 80, 85, 90 grams of fat or something. It really helps you get fat adapted. It gets your body really efficient at running on fat for fuel. However, for weight loss, and this is stuff you learn over time, 3 years into this, you actually want to elevate the protein level and decrease the fat level a little bit because you want your body to burn fat, but you want it to burn the fat that you have around your gut rather than fat that you're eating. So, after you've been in it 6 to 8 weeks or something, a couple of months, 3 months, something like that, and you are well fat adapted and you don't have those hangry things anymore. The cravings are gone. You feel great. You feel like you've got it nailed. You start making the protein be higher than the fat. So maybe you have 100 grams of protein and 75 grams of fat, or 125 grams of protein. Now, a lot of people out there scaring people about protein. It's gluconeogenesis or whatever. Turns this protein into carbs and blah, 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 blah. Well, it can do that, but it only does it on an as-needed basis for the most part. You don't have to worry about that. And especially if you're eating like less than 200 grams of protein a day. So with that being said, it's pretty hard for you to kick the protein up too high. And I speak from experience. This is something I moved into this year. I keep tight check on my blood sugars. I've moved to a constant glucose monitoring device on my arm, and I check my glucose millions of times a day. It's crazy how obsessed I am with it. But look, I like to experiment. I like the dough. And I've upped my protein. Actually went all carnivore for right at 6 weeks, and I like it. Just basically eating nothing but meat. Few other things besides meat. A little bit of cheese. A little bit of pure Greek yogurt. I've had the occasional dessert that was like a protein bar, like a Quest protein bar or something. But basically carnivore, just protein, tons of protein, more protein than I've ever eaten, and it did not affect my blood sugars. And I felt satiated. And I put on some lean muscle mass, which helps you lose weight. The more muscle mass you have, the easier it is to lose weight. The higher rate your body burns calories every day, so it makes weight loss easier. So there's a lot of reasons for it. So I don't want to get off into the weeds on that. I want to get down to the simplicity of the keto diet that I have promised you. Okay? This is something I kind of realized. That was about a year ago or so. I was shopping for stuff and looking at labels and was evaluating carbs and all that stuff for the day. And I did some quick math, and it occurred to me, for me to stay on track, at that time I think I was shooting for a goal around 1,800 calories a day, and I could slip up and do 2,000 calories a day some days. And then some days I'd go as low as 1,500 or 1,600, but around 1,800 was the average I shot for every day, and it was a great weight loss calorie amount for me and everything. And I noticed that if I did approximately 1 carb per 100 calories, that I would wind up at my 20 or less carbs for the day. And I gave it some more thought. I'm like, this pretty much applies to everybody, because people who have a really high calorie intake, let's say you're a 500-pound person, you can easily lose weight at 2,500 calories a day. Shouldn't be a problem. And you could also eat more carbs. You could eat like 25 carbs a day. If you're a smaller person and you're eating 12 to 1,400 calories a day, then you really only need to be eating, somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 carbs a day. You don't really need to be eating 20. You could eat up to 20, but you really don't need that many. And the math becomes really simple at that point. It's 1 carb per 100 calories. So when you're looking at food labels and you're deciding whether to invest your time in that or not, a quick glance at the carb to calorie ratio will tell you how far off that's going to put you by eating it. I'll give you a great example. One of the sacrifices that I make is nearly every day I eat Greek yogurt. I have eaten full fat Greek yogurt. Cabot is a brand that Walmart has. Fage, F-A-G-E, is a brand that Publix generally carries all of from the full fat to the no fat. Walmart carries Fage as well, but they tend to only have the 0%, which is 0% fat. Is what that stands for. But they don't typically have what's called 5%, which will have a ton of fat in it. Now, I've kind of moved away from eating the full fat version because I am wanting to make the protein a larger percentage of my diet and the fat percent less. That's just something I've worked with and I've determined I'm happy with it. So I have gone back to the Fage 0%. But I say all that to say this. That Cabot, for instance, has about 12 carbs a cup. I'd eat about a half a cup of it a morning. Give me about 6 carbs. And it would have, I want to say it'd have like 160 calories for 6 carbs. So that's, about 5 times as much carbs to calorie ratio as I need. But it was a sacrifice I was willing to make because I am mostly carnivore, and your steak and your hamburgers don't really have no carbs. So I could afford it. But if you're not carnivore and you're not eating mostly 0 carbs all day, like eggs aren't 0 carb, but they're close enough. Bacon isn't really 0 carb, but it's close enough. Beef pretty much is 0 carb for the most part. But let's say you're eating regular keto and you're doing lean, greasy vegetables and stuff like that. Hitting that 20 carbs is something you're going to bump up against at the end of the day. And so if you pick your foods as close as possible on the 1 carb per 100 calorie rule, you're going to be fine at the end of the day. Whereas if you get out of line some in the morning, like I do with the yogurt, that I'm going to have to cut carbs back more in the end of the day to kind of offset that. So it's a good guide rule to keep you going. If you look at a package of something and you're like, I've never tried this before, it's got a couple of carbs in it, look at the calorie on it. Look at the calorie count on it. I'll tell you one place you'll run into this is with like hot dogs and sausages and bratwurst and stuff. So you'll look at those and you'll see like one link, like those Johnsonville Better Cheddars are really good. I want to say that they're 200 calories, and I want to say that they have 2 carbs, which fits in perfectly with the ratio. Yep, they have a little bit of carbs. They have more carbs than eating a hamburger, more carbs than eating a piece of steak, but it's still mostly meat. It's a processed meat. But at 2 carbs per 200 calories, you're dead on with your 1 carb per 100 calorie average. Whereas you will see some other, like there's this, I can't think of this other brand of hot dogs that I've seen, but they're very low calorie and high carb. I want to say one of the hot dog links, I want to say, is 80 to 100 calories or something, and it has like 3 carbs. Well, you're only getting 100 calories of nourishment, and you're having to pack away 3 carbs with it. Now, most people are probably going to eat 2 of those hot dogs. They're not going to eat 1. So they're going to get 200 calories or so, and they're going to have 6 carbs with it. Why is this important? Well, it's because you don't want to run out of fuel at the end of the day because you used up all your carbs. You get to the end of the day, and you're like, crap, I have a choice to make now. I'm hungry. I'm already at my 20 carbs, but I've only eaten 1,000 calories today, and I'm going to stop. I'm just going to be really hungry today because I needed to eat 1,700. I'm 700 calories behind, and I'm already at my carb limit. Well, if you will follow the 1 carb per 100 rule, or let it be a guide. Now, look, I'm not saying that everything that you eat has to be 1 carb per 100. I'm just saying it's a guide to let you know how far off track you're going to be by the end of the day. See if that makes sense to you. You can easily look at something that's 200 calories and has 10 carbs in it and know that you're just going to run way out of carbs before you run out of calories, and you're not going to have any sustenance today. And it's also a good guide for picking up stuff that you've never eaten before. Like, you can think about it. Like, I've been through that. I've looked at the store and looked at a package of something, and I'm like, well, I don't ever see anybody talk about this as being keto. I wonder, could I fit this in? And you have to kind of do a lot of mental gymnastics and jump through hoops in your head and stuff and try to, figure out if that's going to work or whatever. And if you use this 1 per 100 rule, you'll know immediately. If it's, if it's 500 calories and it's got 5 carbs in it, you're fine. If it's 100 calories and it's got 5 carbs in it, well, you know that you could still eat it, much like I figure out a way to work my yogurt in. You could still eat it, but you know that you're going to have to do a lot of 0 carb stuff the rest of the day to make that work out. You're going to have a meal that's mostly steak or mostly ground beef or mostly bacon and eggs or something. So that you have a meal that's very close to 0 carbs to get you through the end of the day. So it just lets you know a rough guide of where eating this is going to put you at the end of the day to allow you to remain keto, which is 20 carbs or less. And it's a beautiful thing. It's very simple. It's a super, like I said, my favorite thing about it is being able to look at a package of something I've never looked at before and instantly know how bad it's going to mess up my day of trying to stay keto. I can instantly see its carb to calorie ratio. So you want a 1 to 100, and if you'll stick with that, you'll be fine. And the last thing I'll say about it is stop worrying about the percentages of fat and protein. I obsessed over it the first 6 months I was keto. Then I got really into researching it and trying to find how to hone it and tweak it, probably my second year following that. And what I've learned is if you stay 20 carbs or less, you're fine. It can be high protein. It can be high fat. Both of those are really satiating. If you eat really high amounts of protein and you get in most of your extra calories other than your carbs, most of your extra calories come from protein, you're going to be fine. You're going to be satiated. You're probably going to help yourself build a little bit of lean muscle mass. Now coming up on 3 years into my journey, I have to tell you, I favor the higher protein. Other than initially. Now, going back again, I want to repeat what I said earlier. When you're starting a ketogenic diet, you want to keep that fat really high. So you always want your fat grams to be equal to or higher than your protein grams because you are conditioning your body to function off of fat effortlessly so that it is a fat-burning machine. And the way you do that is force it to use a lot of fat. But that being said, after those first 6 weeks to 2 months in that range, once you get past that, it doesn't really matter in my opinion now, and this is just my opinion, it doesn't really matter where the fat and protein grams fall in relation. If you're eating a much higher protein ketogenic diet, you're going to be fine. You're probably going to add a little extra muscle mass. You're going to be satiated because protein is very satiating, and you're going to be fine. On the other hand, if you're having what's typically considered keto, which is moderate protein, high fat, if you want to do that and you're a guy and your protein is sitting in that 70, 75 gram range, that's fine. You can function with that. If you're a woman, your protein is sitting in that 60 to 75 gram range, that's fine. You can do fine with that, and the rest of your calories come from fat. You could probably do pretty well with that. What I'm saying is, whichever one works for you, and I encourage you to experiment with it. Do a month where you run really high protein. Do a month where you're eating between 100 and 200 grams of protein a day, less than 20 carbs, and the rest is fat, and see how you function on it. And vice versa, you can do a month where you run the fat really high and you're eating 100 to 150 grams of fat, 20 or less carbs, and the rest comes from protein, and see which one you run best at. I'd say you don't ever want to eat probably ever less than 55 to 60 grams of protein a day for a man or a woman. Should probably be your lower limit. Your upper limit can go really high. It really can, higher than you'd think, and you'll be surprised how good you feel. Nevertheless, I see I've rambled on for 20 minutes or so. I want to remind you, first of all, thank my Patreon supporters whose names I mentioned earlier for trying to help offset the cost of this and saying, hey, thank you for what you do. That means the world to me. If you want a podcast that don't have any ads in it, and it doesn't have me rambling about ads at the beginning, that was 4 minutes at the beginning of this thing that you wouldn't ever hear if you were a patron, provided I can figure out how to cut that out. Then think about being a patron. It would mean the world to me. You don't even know how much it would mean to me. I can't even tell you. Like I said, these ads have been making me about $7 a month, and my hosting for this podcast is $18.75 a month. And so, not only do I donate my time, it costs me money to share this stuff, and I don't mind it. It's my calling in life. It's what I do. It's what gives me joy, gives me pleasure, gives me a sense of satisfaction and a sense of self-worth. Losewithmason.com, though, if you want to consider being a patron, losewithmason.com. And if I can help you in any way, let me know. Follow us on social media. That's the easiest way to contact me. Fat Guy Podcast is the username on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Share this with a friend. You never know whose life you might change by doing that. And we'll talk to you next time. Thanks.